HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Brilliant Commodity, Diamonds and Jews in a Modern Setting by Saskia Coenen Snyder. Read by Susan Ericksen. To us, a diamond stood for the making of history, for empire, and for unbounded wealth. We knew that wars had been waged for the possession of such gems, that neither blackest crime nor oceans of blood could dim their piercing luster. We felt that every celebrated stone, whether shining on the breast of a lovely woman or blazing in the scepter of a king, was a symbol of power, a nucleus of tragedy, a focus of human passion. W.C. Scully, Reminiscences of a South African Pioneer, 1913. Preface. On a visit to the Amsterdam Diamond Museum in 2014, in the shadow of the glitter emanating from the Dutch crown jewels, and from a gorilla skull studded with 17,000 brilliants, a modest black-and-white photograph piqued my interest. It was a snapshot of Jewish diamond polishers at work in one of nearly 70 diamond factories operating in the Dutch capital at the end of the 19th century. Sitting on long wooden benches in front of spinning mills, several men stared into the camera, while others remained focused on the work at hand. They all wore long-sleeved shirts, aprons, and drooping mustaches. Their tired eyes locked with mine. Who were they? How did these Jodenfabriken, or Jewish factories, come into being? When I started digging for information, I was stunned to find a wealth of material exposing the weight of diamonds in Dutch Jewish life and the capital's position as the epicenter of global gem manufacturing. By the late 1890s, roughly 60,000 Jews, or 1/10 of the city population, a proportion that would stay steady until the Holocaust, lived in Amsterdam Diamantstad, Diamond City, half of whom relied economically on the stone. The sounds of 7,500 steam-powered polishing mills resonated through the urban landscape for 14 hours a day. Newspaper boys delivered weeklies of the Diamond Workers' Labor Union to thousands of Jewish families, the majority of whom were working-class people living in the Jodenbuurt, the old Jewish neighborhood. Diamond cleaving, cutting, and polishing skills were passed down from one generation to the next, with boys as young as 12 starting apprenticeships. Henry Polak, a Jewish polisher turned labor leader, would eventually secure for this proletarian workforce, by means of large-scale strikes and hard negotiations, a minimum wage and an 8-hour workday, a first in the economies of the Western world. If fin de siècle Paris and Berlin laid bare the poles of France and Germany, bourgeois and bohemian, authoritarian and liberal, Catholic and anti-clerical, the close of the 19th century in Amsterdam was no less fraught with the struggle for dominance in an economy anchored in an extractive industry in Africa and with a product brought to market by a new Jewish working class that was clawing to get into society. My explorations deepened with a research trip to South Africa, where I followed the passage of hundreds of thousands of carats moving from hand-dug mines in remote Kimberley to London company offices. Rough stones arrived in mail bags sent across the South African heartland and the Atlantic Ocean to the capital of the British Empire. Cape Colony records charted the explosive growth of mineral exports. In 1869, as miners discovered massive deposits underneath their pitch tents, 16,542 carats, valued at 24,813 pounds, or about 2.5 million pounds by today's values, reached London. 20 years later, that number had increased to nearly 40 million carats at a value of 46,031,190 pounds, 1/100th of the value today, and a full third of the total exports of the entire Cape Colony. Jews were a vital part of this scene. Newspapers from the early 1870s frequently pointed to Jewish diamantkopers, diamond buyers in the fields, as well as to Jewish auctioneers and merchant entrepreneurs who set up shop in the emerging city of canvas. They came from surrounding towns and coastal cities, from London and Lithuania. Touched by diamond fever, Jewish immigrants joined the thousands of people gravitating toward the Northern Cape. Barney Barnado, a self-made diamond magnate, first crossed the 750 miles from Cape Town to Kimberley by foot, walking next to an ox cart to a new future. My quest to learn more about Jews and gems in an age of imperial expansion brought to light transatlantic connections and the formation of a lasting commodity chain. Goods and capital moved at greater speed and in greater quantities from and to previously isolated territories. Jewish diasporic networks linked families and companies in faraway places, positioning Jews at the forefront of the international trade in South African stones. Records at the New York City Public Library disclosed how these diamond networks extended into America, the largest consumer of ornamental gems. New cutting and polishing factories in New York City ran on machinery imported from Holland, as were the workers manning them. Factory owners lured Jewish expert lapidaries across the sea, promising steady paychecks and new adventures. As I searched, map in hand, for old addresses on Nassau Street and Maiden Lane, some facades still featured the outsized glass windows that maximized natural light coming into the workshops, making it easier to work the small stones. The story that unfolded showed Jews in Africa, Europe, and North America playing crucial roles in every segment of the commodity chain, as immigrant pioneers of the diamond fields and merchant buyers of rough stones, as cutters and polishers in Amsterdam factories and New York City jewelers. Their presence in the industry was sufficiently striking that Jews and diamonds became firmly linked in 19th century popular imagination, a marriage that has persisted to this day. The archives divulged patterns of economic mobility as well as of hardship and misfortune. While being Jewish in the diamond business came with certain advantages, it did not guarantee success. There were many failures along the way, and contention between commercial partners was common. Jews in New York threatened the expulsion of immigrant lapidaries, jeopardizing the status quo. In Amsterdam, Jewish union leaders fought bitterly with Jewish factory owners. And in Kimberley, Jewish merchants testified in court against their own brethren accused of illegal diamond dealing. Thus, Jewish involvement in the industry, fostered by a background in mercantile trade, extensive contacts across oceans, and access to investment capital, did not preclude strife. Ethnic cooperation was practical and sometimes the only option. It was not ideological or always entirely conscious. What mattered most was the extraordinary historical moment when discovery and supply met soaring demand, accelerated by technological advancement, print culture, and the prevailing ethos of enterprise. Diamonds, Wilkie Collins quipped in his 1868 novel The Moonstone, were carbon, mere carbon. He was mistaken. For Jews, gemstones provided economic sustenance and unprecedented opportunity. The intense, skilled labor that went into preparing rough stones for markets galvanized unions fighting for improved working conditions in factories and workshops. Precious stones drove immigration, not merely to southern Africa and North America, but across borders in Europe as well. They kindled desire among elites to belong and to display new wealth. But seeing Jews bedecked with diamonds raised anxieties over ostentation, charges the non-Jewish public made with ease and regularity. Stepping out of the Diamond Museum that day in 2014 and strolling through the city, I was taken aback by how little of this once flourishing industry remains. A few former factories serve as tourist sites, while others, raised in post-war redevelopment projects, have disappeared from the urban landscape altogether. The families of the Jewish men in the photograph fell victim to the Nazis in the 1940s. Very few returned from the concentration and death camps. The commodity chain that revolutionized the 19th century mineral industry, with Amsterdam as an indispensable link, has decentralized and spread to manufacturers in India, North America, Belgium, Russia, and Israel. Today, diamonds are excavated on every continent except Europe, and lapidaries of Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, and Christian descent finish stones for a multi-billion-dollar market. The foundations for this global enterprise, I discovered, lay with Jewish pioneers, diamantaires, and merchant entrepreneurs who contributed at every turn to the global economic connectedness that accelerated in the 20th century. Facets added to a diamond function like tiny mirrors, refracting incoming light into a multitude of directions, enhancing its sparkle. Placed in its historical setting, the gem performs in similar fashion, illuminating various dimensions of 19th century Jewish life in different parts of the world. As I followed the stone across oceans and hemispheres, I shared in the experiences of the people extracting diamond-rich soil in buckets and trolleys, transporting parcels across dangerous, inhospitable terrain in mail carts to seaports, and repositioning gems during the polishing process on cacophonous factory floors. Jewish immigrants and laborers, at work on the African diamond fields, in the Amsterdam Jodenbuurt, or on New York's 47th Street, came out of the shadows, and their handiwork shone at the heart of the modern imperial project. Introduction. Clarity, cut, carat, and color. Strolling through the Dutch Impressionism wing of the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, visitors may notice that a disproportionate number of oil paintings originate from the art collection of Andries van Wezel, 1856 to 1921. Eduard Carsen's moody scenes of Dutch villages and farmhouses, George Hendrik Beitner's street scenes, Menso Kamerling One's flowery still lifes, and Isaac Israel's colorful portraits of young women adorn the walls, all gifts of this collector. Van Wezel, an affluent businessman and art patron of Jewish descent, born and raised in one of Amsterdam's poorest neighborhoods, had befriended most of the contemporary painters of the Amsterdam Impressionist school. He bequeathed his art collection, consisting of more than 150 pieces, to the city's largest museum. He wished for the public to marvel, as he had once done, at the artistic talent that portrayed fin de siècle life and culture in such fleetingly beautiful ways. Van Wezel had made his money in diamonds. Born in 1856 to Solomon Levy van Wezel and Judith Levy Ansel, he first set foot in A.E. Daniels & Zoon diamond factory at the age of 13. For years he would leave early in the mornings and walk from his home on Lazarus Alley, in the middle of the Jewish neighborhood, to the nearby Daniels factory. 12 hours later, he returned home to his parents, his older brother Judah, also a diamond polisher apprentice, and his younger brothers Hartog, Marcus, and Joachim. Years earlier, his father had entered het vak, the profession, as the diamond business was known in Dutch circles. Solomon van Wezel, like many other Jewish parents in 19th-century Amsterdam, considered diamond manufacturing a sensible career path and subsequently arranged apprenticeships for all of his sons. Not only was it wise to learn a trade, but also diamond manufacturing was a line of work that could, when times were good, generate substantial earnings. Fortunately for the Van Wezel family, in 1869, the year Andries began his training, the discovery of large diamond deposits in southern Africa injected the local diamond industry with energy, productivity, and revenue, the likes of which Amsterdam had not seen since the golden age of the early modern era. As weekly incomes of skilled diamond workers increased sharply in the 1870s, the Van Wezels quickly accumulated capital. Solomon moved up the ranks to manage the Daniels factory. He bought a house on a respectable street and relocated his family. Nearly 70 factories, up from 4 companies a decade earlier, became operational in Amsterdam over the course of the 1880s. Andries, too, thrived. He invested his savings, and by the age of 26, he owned his own firm, purchased a residence on the reputable Prinsengracht, Prince's Canal, and belonged to the privileged male elite with voting rights. Diamonds had changed their lives. The Van Wezels prospered in the transatlantic commodity chain in diamonds that developed in the last quarter of the 19th century, connecting people, goods, and technology across continents. West and East India Company ships had brought diamonds to Europe since the early 1600s, but in small quantities affordable only to European royalty and the aristocracy. These gems came exclusively from India and Brazil, where workers stood knee-deep in riverbeds, sieving muddy debris by hand, unaided by the industrial machinery and mechanization that enabled modern deep-level mining. Still rare, diamonds were cleaved, cut, and polished by lapidaries in home-based workshops. By the time Andries van Wezel opened his first factory in Amsterdam, all this had changed dramatically. Over 2 million carats of rough stones arrived annually from an unexpected location deep in the southern African interior. Diamond mining companies floated shares and bonds on the European money market to attract foreign investments in the Cape Colony. Factories used steam rather than horses to power the mills that metamorphosed rough stones into sparkling brilliance, and tens of thousands of European Jews engaged in the business of buying, manufacturing, and selling diamonds to a growing clientele with regal social ambitions. Van Wezel's success, his factory, the sheer scale of operation, and his professional networks were manifestations of fundamental changes taking place during an age of empire, transforming both the diamond industry and urban Jewish communities. Focusing on this industry, this book probes the role of Jews in imperial history and, vice versa, the significance of imperialism in Jewish history. Historians have rarely explored the complex Jewish interactions with 19th and 20th century overseas empires. It was instead within the political confines of the nation-state that scholars examined Jewish acculturation and integration, a rather narrow lens, considering the geographic mobility and trans-hemispheric commercial networks that were shaping modern Jewish life. A brilliant commodity hopes to show the permanent footprints that Andries van Wezel and Jewish entrepreneurs like him left on multiple continents. Pioneer merchants like Adolf Mosenthal, who before being drawn to minerals, introduced merino sheep from France and Angora goats from Turkey to South Africa, galvanizing international wool exports. The Lilienfeld brothers, former prizefighter and vaudeville entertainer Barney Barnado, Sammy Marks, known for his salty humor, and the self-effacing Alfred Bate, a master of figures and exceptional being to rise amid the dust of Kimberley. Their experiences, and those of their families, may not have been the norm for most European Jews, few of whom achieved comparable levels of affluence, yet how they made their living had a profound impact on the lives of countless people in Africa, Europe, and America. Their enterprise and intrigues, their alliances and fallings out in the development of mining, manufacturing, and trade of diamonds were felt in employment, labor relations, and unionization on the economic front, in public perceptions of Jews, and in patterns of migration and the growth of cities. By 1875, less than 10 years after the discovery of diamonds in Kimberley, the diggers' settlement had grown into the second largest town in South Africa. 7 years later, it was the first town in the entire Southern Hemisphere to integrate electric street lighting. Its nearly 50,000 inhabitants included several hundred Jews, making it the second largest Jewish community in the Cape Colony. When Barnado, Bate, Marks, and other men from the diamond fields threw themselves into gold mining in the 1880s, applying the expertise and capital resources accumulated in the Northern Cape to the Witwatersrand, they were extending the British Empire's reach into the African interior. As randlords, their imprint on local and transatlantic economies, positive as well as negative, deepened. If these changing realities signaled a revitalized Jewish presence in world affairs within the realms of empire, why have historians paid so little attention to it? Inserting colonialism into that assessment has proven difficult, particularly in Anglo-Jewish history, which has long overlooked the colonial connections that undergirded the embourgeoisement of Jews in Great Britain. The identification of colonialism with Jewish finance may have caused the topic to be unpopular, not to mention the ever-present polemics over Zionism and the State of Israel, which makes colonialism a veritable minefield for Jewish studies scholars. But the lacuna echoes beyond the field of Anglo-Jewish history. Catherine Hall surmised that the discipline of Anglo history as a whole worked for decades under the assumption that Britain could be understood in itself without reference to other histories. Only more recently, she admitted, has a consensus formed that, in order to understand the specificity of the national formation, we have to look outside it. New imperial histories have subsequently tested the premise that colony and metropole were terms that could be understood only in relation to each other, although in these studies, too, Jews have remained largely anonymous. Their small numbers in imperial settings may have been a factor, as well as their ambiguous social standing and legal status, which took on different meanings as they moved between the physical spaces of the center and the periphery. Jews were white, but not quite, and they often fell in between the categories of us and them. Indeed, if ever there was a people that lived at the borders between cultures and civilizations, it is the Jews, stated Ivan Kalmar and Derek Penslar. The difficulty of neatly placing Jews in familiar categories, they could be both Orientalist and Orientalized, the colonist and the colonized, frequently resulted in their omission from the literature altogether. It is precisely this hybridity that exposes the lapses of established classifications and the complexities of the imperial project, two useful starting points in the recalibrations of Jewish economic history. Close examination of the diamond and its trajectory through imperial channels tells the story of the people who mined, traded, cut, polished, wore, sold, and desired these gems in local and transatlantic contexts. It brings to life hopeful diamond diggers in the Northern Cape, factory workers in Amsterdam, and diamond dealers in New York City, all connected through the fluctuations of supply and demand. A material culture approach to the diamond underscores how empire facilitated the movement of diamonds and people, determining their routes and destinations, and how the object itself molded the contours of empire. The stone's economic potential pulled industrial and urban development into the South African heartland, propelling large numbers of people across continents. Extracting diamonds from the earth required water pumps, steam-powered engines, explosives, conveyors, mining locomotives, boilers, and other heavy equipment to be hauled from London to Kimberley, first by boat across the Atlantic, and then by cart and wagon hundreds of miles inland. The diamond's reputation as the rarest, purest, and most precious stone validated the European claim to colonial wealth, justifying imperial rule of the Dark Continent, the seizure of land, and the exploitation of black labor. Diamonds, as one observer of the mineral display at the Paris exhibition exclaimed, really do sparkle with meaning. Husband, I don't believe you heard a word of the sermon today. You were looking the whole time at the diamonds that woman in front of us wore. Wife, well, there are sermons in stone, you know. Puck, Volume 52, Issue Number 1334, September 1902.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?